This is the Code, Deploy, Go Live podcast, episode 6 with Julie Turner and Andrew Connell. This episode is available as video on our YouTube channel, linked in our show notes. In this episode, Andrew and I discussed Microsoft 365 API landscape and the importance of APIs in supporting extensibility and adoption of the platform, in addition to covering the latest news, recorded live May 15th, 2025. Okay. Well, hey, Andrew, we're back. Episode 6. Today, we're going to talk about Microsoft 365 API landscape. This is a passionate topic for me, so that'll be fun to get into. But let's start first with some news. So I have one that I am super excited to share. A gentleman by the name of Martin Lingstuyl, who is part of the Microsoft Patterns and Practice Group, but also known as the Microsoft 365 Power Platform community, who is a contributor to the CLI for Microsoft 365. He took a request that I had, turned it into an enhancement, and that request was that I wanted for Azure DevOps CI/CD pipelines to be able to do federated identity login for my pipeline. So instead of having to have an app registration and, a client ID and, a certificate and all of the stuff in my pipeline and have to, put together all of that stuff to log into the CLI to then do things like set up the scopes the permissions on an Azure function identity that I had set up, or to deploy something to the tenant app catalog and SharePoint framework or something like that. I want to use the CLI in the pipeline, but we didn't have a way to do federated identity. Well, we do now. It's in beta, and I've tried it out, and Martin and I did a little bit of back and forth thing to try to get it to work perfectly. And, we had a little hiccups here and there, but figured it all out, and it is heaven. Absolute heaven. I am so excited. It's a very cool new feature, and I'm really excited that they did it. No word right at the moment about supporting GitHub, but I assume that that's probably coming or could be done, or maybe it's already there. Oh, you have something to say. I'll let
Julie,
you say it.
You don't even read my articles.
Oops.
You don't even read my newsletter, because Martin did the GitHub stuff first. And he's had it done for about a month or so. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Yes. So the GitHub stuff has been done for a little while, because it actually is more.
I don't use GitHub. I'm a real developer.
That's okay. You work on a dead platform. That's fine. Azure DevOps is that ship that's just got the rudders stuck on autopilot. It's just flying.
Valid.
I jest, not really. I'm actually being serious, but it's fine. Azure DevOps
there's nothing wrong with it. Easily integrated. So right now it's easy.
It's easily integrated. It's also used by significant organizations, including Microsoft, where they do all their enterprise stuff. All their software stuff is most of their software stuff like Windows and Office, everything is all still in there. So I'm not in Azure DevOps. I'm not poo-pooing it or anything. I mean, I am. I don't like it, but I think GitHub is easier. But regardless, there's nothing wrong with it. And no, we're not announcing anything that it's going away anytime soon, everybody. But I do want to say this is freaking awesome. First of all, or I guess second of all, Martin, you can actually, you're on your own time, you can actually go to your LinkedIn profile, and you can actually pronounce your name. You can say it. We are relying on what Google told us, which is probably pretty close, because we have asked Bing, it would be bastardizing how to pronounce your last name. So we think we're correct there. But hey, go to LinkedIn and put the pronunciation in there. You hear from your own words. But dude, awesome work with this. This is much preferred of a way to go through and do CI and CD, regardless of the platform you're using. If you're using GitHub or if you're using Azure DevOps, and the fact that you can essentially grant a branch, a repo and a branch, the ability to act as having its own permissions and having intro ID. Leverage the identity from the ID token that's passed along from the other IDP, the other identity provider. In my case, I like to use GitHub, but in your case, you want to use Azure DevOps. That's fine. But the fact that we can actually do this now and have no credentials means there's no passwords you got to manage or deal with expiring. which we know is a hard thing for Microsoft to deal with. Certificates expiring, which is another hard thing Microsoft has to deal with. We don't have to deal with it here, but they have a hard time with DNS, so whatever.
Yeah.
But
no, 100%. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I think the other piece of this too is, for Azure DevOps, it's the service connection. And in my case, I do a lot of, because I have a lot of smaller clients without really IT departments, it becomes important to be able to manage their deployments for them. And so I'm using a lot of service connections with user assigned managed identities as part of those. And so to be able to just manage each one of those and get it all set up, and everybody, I don't have to manage a certificate for everybody. Oh my God. It's just so much better. So I'm super excited.
It's a good thing. Good work, Martin. You are a hero, and at least I will buy you a drink for the GitHub work, and I'll buy you another drink for the for the Azure DevOps stuff. I don't know when we're going to get a chance to cross paths, but when we do, remind me that I owe you a beer, because that's a good excuse for us to go to the bar and I can have a beer and we can just catch up, because I don't think we've connected in person before. If we have, then I just have my dementia's kicking in. So
we are getting old.
We're getting old.
All right. So you have some news items?
I do. We're going to kind of blaze through these a little quick. We have a handful of things related to Microsoft Teams. So the first one is that Microsoft Teams, they announced the generally available support for what's called Nested App Authentication, NAA. This is something that's been available to us in Office web apps that you create using Office.js. The idea behind this is that it's been in public preview. I don't remember when. It was sometime in 2024. They announced it in public preview in Teams. Now it's available in production as GA across all of 365. So Office, Outlook, Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft 365. So what is this? Today, if you were going to obtain a single sign-on token, Microsoft calls it single sign-on. It's really just an access token, but you're getting just the OpenID Connect token for the current user. So you're asking Outlook or you're asking Teams and say like, hey, I want to know who the current user is. And you're already authenticated. So it's like, here's who it is. But that token is just, think of it like a passport or a government ID. It just has information on who you are, your name, or UPN, or your preferred username, or tenant ID and intra, and the object ID, which is the ID of your user account in intra in that tenant. So there's no permissions to it. You can't use this for anything. So what you had to do in the past is, if you wanted to call like Microsoft Graph, is you'd have to go obtain an access token that was allowed to call Graph. And a common way to do this, or the most safest way to do this, was to take that ID token, pass it to a server-side process. That server-side process would implement a OAuth flow called the on behalf of flow, or the OBO flow, where it would reach out to Intra. It would authenticate as an app that you created for your project. And it would say, I need an access token that's able to call Microsoft Graph, and I need it on behalf of Andrew, who signed in, and I'm going to assert that Andrew's asking it because here is the assertion, his ID token that he got, or Microsoft calls a single sign-on token or a bootstrap token. What Nested App Authentication does is it allows you now inside of Teams, doesn't Outlook as well, but it allows you inside of Teams to do all of this client side. Instead of having to have that server side backend hit, you still should implement a fallback to do the server side piece to it if the nested app authentication is supported or is fails. But it's a big boost. The only thing about this when it comes to Teams is this is only going to be available in personal Teams tabs. It's not available in channel ones, or it's not available in bots or in because bots are server side, not client side. So that's the only place where you're going to see this that you want to pay attention to. So this is a big one.
Cool.
The next thing I'm going to touch on is this is one that I'm going to try and be a little careful on what I say here, because I'm a little pissed at this. But the Microsoft Teams group, or specifically the Teams AI library group, has announced the V2 of their library. The thing I'm irritated, and there's some cool features to it. Like, it says it was inspired by your feedback and built for joy. Give me a break. Come on. They added support for MCPs. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They added supports. They also added some support for adding some additional calls here. They say we have this one library that does everything. They effectively built their own Microsoft, the Teams JavaScript SDK. The Teams group already has that. They built their own adaptive cards wrapper. Last year, developers told Teams they didn't like that. And so they stopped doing their own wrapper around it. And they said you can have the direct access to the packages. Apparently, they've built their own graph client as well. It's like, we've already got one and it's very nice. It's like a Monty Python skit. So these guys really, it's hard to kind of understand what they've done. And I'm trying to be I'm not being very reserved, but I'm trying to be somewhat reserved and passing judgment until we hear more. Hopefully we'll get more clarity on this, because next week, we're recording this right now on May the 15th. And next week is Microsoft Build. And we're hoping to get more information, more clarity on this, because right now it sure gets a feel with all the tools and stuff that they've given us. You don't use the Teams AI library in the Teams toolkit anymore. You do it in your own thing now. And so it's a little frustrating, because it's kind of like, you guys have given us now 2 sets of tools to build Teams apps. And now the Teams AI library is kind of like somebody thinks that because they've AI in the name, they're like special. I don't know. Maybe that's going around the industry, but whatever. So anyway, I'm curious to hear more about this and hopefully get some clarity on it. Another thing that went GA that is thankfully going to be announced as a thing at Build next week, which I can talk about it now because we're recording it, and I'm not allowed to talk about it until it's actually live, but that's okay. We won't publish this stuff till Build's live. There's a new language called TypeSpec, or not a new language, but there's this language called TypeSpec, and it's a language that, I say language, think of it kind of like a DSL, but it's really a language for defining APIs. Now, you're like, wait a minute, don't we already have that? Yes, we have things like Swagger. We have Open API descriptor documents, or OADs. We use those inside of declarative agents. When you build a declarative agent with a Teams toolkit, you're writing some HTML, you're writing JavaScript. What TypeSpec allows you to do is it allows you to use this language that is like, it's type safe. It's kind of like a little bit of TypeScript, but it compiles down to generating the descriptor files for APIs, like Swagger files, and also the stuff that we have for like declarative agents. Now, it's promising. I've been like, not working with, but I've been kind of like, paying attention to what's going on here, and the team is, let me kind of see what's going on, give them some feedback on it. It's promising to see how this goes. I will say that one of the things that's a little concerning about this is that right after it goes GA, and the gentleman that wrote the GA announcement for it, who's also like the guy that owns TypeSpec, right after it goes live, I noticed the same day that was the day that Microsoft had their RIF of 3% or 6,000 employees, and he was one of those people. So now I'm just like, well, that's kind of brutal that you just shipped something as GA, and the gentleman who was responsible for it, at least the public face of it, just got let go, or just got told he was like, I was like, that doesn't instill confidence. Number one, it's kind of a jerk move. But second of all, it doesn't really instill confidence, like going, is TypeSpec going to be around? I mean, it's a V1, it's there, but like, what's the story? So it'll be interesting to learn a bit more about that at Build next week. Also related to that, the guys behind Dev Proxy, Waldeck Mastercars, and Gary Trender, they released a new version of Dev Proxy, version 0.27. And now they also generate TypeSpec files when you're for generating things like the Open API descriptor documents and stuff that you would normally want to use with a declarative agent. So that's a cool addition. The last 2 or 3 things I want to throw out here is a topic that I do want to spend some time talking about in another episode. But it's something that's basically, it's taking the internet by fire, the AI world by fire, and it's called the Model Context Protocol, or MCPs. Yep. Think about it like this. I'm going to give it just a very small nutshell. An MCP, if I have an API, so like a Microsoft Graph team, they have an API. If I want to use Microsoft Graph with a large language model, or like if I'm building a Copilot agent, I have to write the REST API that's going to leverage the Graph API, and I have to teach the large language model how to actually interact with my REST API that's going to call Microsoft Graph. Well, what an MCP server does is that if the Graph team created an MCP server, you set up the authentication, Now I can go to an MCP client. For example, Claude is a good example because this whole MCP protocol came out of Anthropic, which is the company behind Claude. I can register the Graph MCP server, and without having to do anything else, the large language model for Claude can look at that MCP server, and it can it's kind of like the Matrix when Neo sticks the thing in the back of his head, and it's like, you now know Kung Fu. And so the language model is trained on all the stuff that it can do. There's this killer link here I'm gonna put in the show notes here from Hacker News. There's a company called Vantage. They create an MCP server for their stuff. Vantage is a SaaS product that is on the FinOps, financial operations, that does a lot of stuff, being able to look at your cloud spend and stuff like that. They've got a killer video where you can ask Claude a question about your cloud spend, and Claude, now that it knows what it can do with Vantage, it's like, I now know Vantage. And it starts talking to the API, and it's like, I'm going to go get this data. I'm going to 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 go do this. I'm going to go do this. And now that it has all that info, it then can respond to your questions about what you're doing on your spend. It's really freaking cool. MCPs are now supported by Copilot Studio. That's something I'll add a link in the show notes. There is now an Azure MCP repository for hosting your own MCP servers in Azure. I'll put that link in the show notes. And now, as I said, the Teams AI Library V2, it also knows MCP. So this is really cool because it basically says, instead of in Copilot today, where we have this orchestrator that I have to train on what it can do, its new skills, and I basically, you can almost think about saying the orchestrator goes away and the language model turns into the orchestrator by training it. Here's the MCP servers you can talk to. And it goes so it's basically the language model turns into Neo, and an MCP server is just that little cartridge to shove in the back of the head. Now you know Kung Fu.
Okay. That's an interesting way to describe it.
Maybe we don't need to do an episode on it later, but anyway, that's okay.
Well, if you plug me in, I will then know all about them, and it won't matter, right?
There you go. All I got to do is just shove a big needle in the back of your head. So we need
an MCP on an MCP, and then we just put that in, and then I asked the large language model to tell me all about MCPs.
Yes.
Inception.
Yes, I think so. Actually, just tell it to crawl the documentation. It's now I know what an MCP server is. Now I just need to know one. And there's this whole public directory already out there for all these MCPs that you can connect to. So it's cool. It's really cool. It's a big it's very cool. So that's a bunch of the news that we want to cover today, that I want to cover. So it's big stuff. And I'm sure we're going to have a boatload of stuff when we do our Microsoft Build recap for those of us in the Microsoft 365 developer program, and then other fun news from Build. Hopefully fun news. Don't you find it strange that Microsoft did a 6,000 person riff the week before Build?
I don't even understand how this whole thing is going to play out, quite frankly. I'm very confused. And knowing some of the people who have been let go, I'm in awe. I'm wait, what? Wait, who?
Yeah, it's
okay.
It's disappointing. I'm surprised just from a company point of view, they did it before Build and not right after Build, because it's do you think there's any grudges that are being held, or people are frustrated with it? I mean, come on.
Maybe,
really?
And maybe not. I don't want to go too deep on the who and the whatever. I'm just, the people that I know that I've been let go, I'm literally gobsmacked. I'm these are public facing people that really bring home the Microsoft brand. And for those people to be let go is just really shocking and disappointing. So
yeah,
I'll let it be that.
No such thing as loyalty.
Nope, anyway. Not at all.
All right.
Let's move on to one of my favorite topics. All the people in the ecosystem who know me well know that this is one of my more favorite topics to rant about, and it is Microsoft 365's focus or lack of focus on APIs. And so, I'm just so incredibly frustrated by the lack of investment, at least from a public-facing viewpoint. What happens inside, that happens inside, and the reasons for it, that happens inside of Microsoft. And some of that I know about, and probably most of that I don't know about. But the big point here is, from the outside, the lack of investment on the API surface just blows my mind.
Big ball
I just
drop.
don't understand it. Yeah.
I agree. And I do want to, there's one thing you called out in the intro to our show. And
Yes.
what you just said, let's just be clear that this is a Microsoft 365 gripe. All right.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
I want to just draw a link here to highlight something as let's just do like a mic drop moment here. I want to read you something from the first paragraph and then the first sentence from the second paragraph on one of my news items. A release from Type Spec 1.0 GA. I'm quoting here. Quote, TypeSpec is a Microsoft-built, community-supported project that makes API-first development truly practical by empowering you to define your APIs in a concise, human-readable format and generate blah, 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 blah. Next sentence in the first paragraph. Quote, the Azure SDK team has considered API-first development a best practice for a long time. Done. It would really be cool if the company that owned Azure got together with the company that owned Microsoft 365 and could get on the same page. But I digress.
I'm going to explode. Holy molykins.
I debated dropping that at the end of the episode for you, but I figured, you know what? No, let me just throw some gasoline on Julie. And Julie, you got the mic. Have at it for a great show. I'm going to go walk the dogs.
Oh, yeah. Great. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, this is obviously, I've talked about what my business is, what my focus is. In general, Simpraxis Consulting is all about helping our customers implement the Microsoft 365 plethora of tools, the ecosystem, to help their business be, business be profitable, fluent, get things done, all of the things, right? And so a lot of that is out of the box. And so there's, people that, I work with, and their focus is to do those implementations as best they can. But of course, people are going to have requirements where they hit a wall, where the way you can configure out of the box is either just not exactly the way you need it to be, or it doesn't function the right way, or in some cases it's broken and you need to make it more robust or whatever it is. And it's just so incredibly frustrating that when then I step in and we start having a conversation about how we can extend the Microsoft 365 platform, because we can, and there's a lot of ways to do that. And it's not just Power Platform, but let's not get started on that rant today. When we're talking about pro code ways to extend this system so that people can adopt it into their business to make things happen, then you need APIs for that. And you need all the APIs for that. The lack of a Pages API that is robust. Now we have one, but it's poor at best. I will say nothing more about it other than poor is all I can give it. A grade of maybe D- if I'm grading on the A through fail scale.
Well, it didn't fail.
It doesn't well, it does in some cases. It doesn't support all the modern stuff. So it's not, they release new things, but the APIs don't support it. That's happening constantly. So we're getting new features in the UI, and then people go, oh, this is great. I'd like to use it in this way, or set it automatically for someone, or whatever it might be. And we don't have APIs to do that. And so what do we end up doing? As developers, we end up having the conversation with our clients. Well, we can't do it as a supported thing, but we could do it as an unsupported thing. And so then we're sniffing the network tab in our browser console and reverse engineering the first party APIs, because the APIs exist. They do. I mean, otherwise you couldn't write the code. I mean, Microsoft 365 is a SaaS product. It's a browser-based product. Those APIs exist. We can use them, but it's not supported. And that's the big, are you freaking kidding me? And I had somebody say to me, well, we want to be able to be nimble. And so if we're, putting out a new feature, don't you, what if we have to, to pull that feature back because it's not landing and people don't want it anymore. Would you want the APIs to exist? I'm like, of course we want the APIs to exist, because 9 times out of 10, the reason you're pulling back those features later is because you didn't get adoption. And the reason you're not getting any adoption is because nobody can automate any of it. The idea that people don't want to, the number one thing, absolutely the number one thing that people want to be able to do, at least with Microsoft 365, because it's so many pieces and parts that are all sort of tied together by an Entra ID group construct, is they want to be able to provision those things. And if you can't provision the thing and configure all the configurations that go along with it, then you are dead in the water. And so without those APIs, if you deploy a new feature and there is no API to configure that thing, that you can't, if you're a big organization, you're like, well, we can't use that feature. So then you're not using that feature because you're waiting for the API. And Microsoft's sitting there going, well, nobody's using that feature, so I guess nobody liked it. Are you kidding me right now? It's fundamental to the platform that every single feature that goes in the UI needs to be supported day of release by an API, period. End of conversation. I'm so done with this topic.
Wait, no, hold on. Not end of conversation. We have a podcast here, so we're not done yet.
Okay,
just to let
we're
everybody
not
know.
done.
So let me let you take a let me let you take a breath for a second. I was not about to interrupt you. Good rant, really good rant. I'm sitting here like going, is there any way, I'm going to let you finish your water really quick. I'm saying, is there any way that I can go get that animated GIF of Christina Aguilera on The Voice, just going like, just preach, just like, oh my God, preach, just keep going, Julie, keep going. So here's the thing. Let me give you had some great scenarios. There is one ad, interesting enough, by Microsoft, but there is one ad from Microsoft about 15 years ago. I think it was 2010. It might have been 2011. It was on Thanksgiving in the United States. And I thought it was one of the most effective ads for developers that I've ever seen. And it was about...
They had ads for developers?
No, well, kind of. So it was a great ad. Remember Xbox had that thing called Kinect, the camera that was on top of your desk?
Okay. Yeah.
They shipped an API for it. Now,
right. I remember this. Yes.
When they shipped the API for it, I'm in a mess. I was trying to find this while we were doing it. I have a list of ads here, but I don't want to try and watch it while we're trying to do the podcast. But there was something in there that's like going, look at all the things that you can do. We can do this and we can do this. And then it said, I'm paraphrasing this part, but the ad said, we shipped an API, but the most interesting things that you can do with it are the things we didn't think about that you thought about. So here's the thing. If you ship it, number one, let's look at this. Microsoft, by not shipping an API, and they're not giving us like the Pages API, when they don't ship an API, they are bound by their own imagination on what people can do with these different features. If you ship a feature first and then you have an API that exposes the features you thought of, you've time boxed it. If you build a house based on what your vision is on the outside of the house, and then later you go in and you start putting the kitchen together and everything, you try and model it out, like going, it doesn't work like that. Now, I'm not an architect, so maybe it is, but let's just say it doesn't, because the analogy is going and I'm on a roll. So you don't sit there and put the inside of the house after you've done the outside of the house. It's all kind of done together. If you build an API and you're like, well, what happens if we need to pull back a feature? That's called a beta. And that's also called like deprecating a feature with some announcements here. That's fine. You've done this before. My God, Microsoft, you are so good at deprecating stuff, especially last year. I think you can handle this one just fine. And if you can't, that's okay. You've got another company that you can pair with. They're called Azure. And you go talk to them and find out how they deal with this kind of crap, because they do it too. And they've been doing it for a lot longer than you have. The other thing too about this is that Microsoft 365 already even saw something like this. Now, it's not a perfect example, but for years, we were deploying SharePoint on premises, and we were having all those poor IT pros that are not listening to our show because it's only developers listening to our show. And if you are, that's okay. I don't want to turn off our administrator contingent. We still like you. You're still here. You're welcome to hang around. Just have to take a few punches. So here's the thing. When they were going through and they were rolling out the SharePoint, they were setting up all the backups. They were having to go through database migrations. They were having to do like the DB attach and all that kind of stuff. All the challenges that they ran into and all the frustrations that they had complaining to Microsoft about managing a SharePoint deployment. Microsoft tried to make some improvements, but it wasn't until they started doing it themselves when they started hosting an Office 365, which is now Microsoft 365. And then we saw SharePoint 2016 came out, which basically had no new features in it, except for a ton of administrative stuff to make it easier to manage SharePoint. Why? Because now they were feeling the pain. They were understanding the problem. If you have an API, you can see what people are doing. When you talk about that Pages API and you hear people complaining about the Pages API, they're always like, well, what would you want to do? And then they go, people really do that? Like, yes, a lot of companies do it. They want to provision stuff. They want to put web parts on the page. They want to configure the properties on that web part. They want to go through and put some content on it. They want to provision stuff. They're like, really? People actually do that? Get out of your like echo chamber of Redmond and just look at what companies are doing. And when you see what they're doing and what the tools that they're working with, it's how the SharePoint framework actually came to be. The SharePoint framework in 2015, 2016, Microsoft looked at SharePoint and said, what are people doing to customize apps? And they're like, oh my God, the
Script
most
editor.
popular two web parts are the content editor web part and the script editor web part. And what were they doing? They were doing jQuery and bastardizing the pages by doing DOM manipulation. And they said, you know what? We're going to come to you. We're going to sit there and build something that is a first-class deployment model for client-side solutions because apparently that's what you want to do. And it fits our desire too to get you off the server. So now we're going to do this and we're going to carve out areas of the page that you can mess with and we won't break you unless the list team comes in and starts breaking stuff because they didn't test things in SharePoint framework. That's a different story. But I don't understand like why the Microsoft 365 team is so blind to this across the freaking board when the company has already shown that this is a good model going forward. And they're doing it today. They even released a new product that even says Azure sees APIs first as a best practice.
I don't know. Yes, all of what you said, everything you said. I mean, so right now the landscape is that we have the Microsoft Graph and it has much of what is needed for doing any kind of, it is the most complete surface of APIs that we have for manipulating Microsoft 365. We still have left over from the on-prem days and 2013 when they really started using REST endpoints instead of SOAP services, we have the SharePoint APIs. The issue here is the two have not fully converged, and it's hard to understand where the support is going wrong there because, of course, first party, when SharePoint has to get adjusted in some way, they're going to implement those features for first party on the SharePoint endpoints. And then somebody has to go along and sort of port them to Graph later. And if you think about how the Graph works, it's just a proxy to all of those APIs under the covers. And as developers, if you're doing much of your customization in SharePoint, which a lot of us do. I mean, if you're building extensibility, you're building it mostly for the audience of business process and, business people and their processes. And so your SharePoint and the intranet and, the communications platforms is the place where you're putting those extensibility endpoints. And so having those APIs in both or one of them completely is kind of needed. And so there's sort of like, we've been sort of straddling this situation where, well, is it in Graph? No, it's not. Oh, is it in SharePoint? Yes, it is. Oh, is it public in the SharePoint ones? Oh, no, it's in the, hidden, endpoint that, v2.1 or whatever it might be, SharePoint endpoint. And don't even get me started on the fact that the Graph won't version. It's just a mess. It's just a real mess. The other piece of this, from my perspective, and I have a bunch of notes about this, but I think I just want to touch on it more lightly, is permission types. And this is something that I go and sit in, I either give talks on development or I sit into other people's talks on development. And I think ubiquitously throughout the ecosystem, one of the not understood pieces of APIs is permission types. There are two types of permissions: delegated permissions and application permissions. Also
known as delegated is app plus user, and application permissions are app only.
Yep, great, thank you.
Sorry, I had to jump in.
Interject anywhere.
I know
No,
you're on a roll.
interject anywhere.
I'm not going to be able to talk
anywhere.
today because you're so passionate about this.
No, interject anywhere.
Yeah.
What I just wanted to like sort of make clear to people is that when you give application permissions, that means that that piece of code has been specifically given access to whatever scopes it was given access to. Whatever permission endpoints it has been given access to, that application then can act on that. It doesn't mean that there's like a user who can like log in and then magically have these elevated application level permissions. When you give application permissions, the user's not involved at all anymore. The scenarios where we would use this is like an Azure function or something quote unquote server side. And so I'm using quote unquote server side because in today's world, that means cloud-based solutions, right? That we're hosting somewhere. And so that application has those permissions. The user doesn't come in and use those permissions. It doesn't work like that. The application has those permissions and they can be quite elevated because of things like in SharePoint land, sites full control all, which means that that application, when it gets a token, can essentially has the rights to go into any SharePoint site in your entire tenant and do anything that it wants to that is supported by the API, right? So anything. Yeah, that's applications. Delegated permissions, and so you sort of reframed that as saying app plus user. It's this Venn diagram. And this is the thing that people do not get at all. When I grant sites full control all to as a delegated permission, it's not called that, it's slightly different. I just can't think of it right now. But when I say that to a delegated permission, it means all the sites that user has security permissions to. Not all the sites, because it's not elevated permissions. If they don't have permissions to that site, they're not going to have access to that site. So even though the scope is all the sites, it just means all the sites the user has access to. So it's a Venn diagram between permissions and the scope. And a lot of people think that delegated permissions, when you say, oh, it's all the sites, it's like somehow they have access to all the sites and permissions go out the window. And that is just not the case. And this is why the things that we talk about all the time with the SharePoint framework, when it gives graph permissions in the SharePoint framework, why that's more concerning is because if the code is malicious, it depends on which user hits that malicious code as to what permissions or what content that user has access to. That could be the problem. If only a low-level employee with access to almost nothing hit a malicious code, they probably couldn't get to anything that would be a concern anyway. So it's understanding that Venn diagram of security plus the scope that I think people do not understand, and that I kind of wanted to at least touch on quickly.
No, I think that you're spot on. I mean, it's important to understand those two different sides of permissions, and it's a little scary too when you talk to some companies like a vendor or somebody who's built something for a product or a service they sell in the Microsoft 365 space. Really, actually, sorry, I should say anything when it comes to working with Microsoft Graph, because it's not just Graph doesn't just touch 365. It also touches Intune, it touches Windows, and also Intra ID as well, among others. But I think it's scary when you see a company does not understand the concept of what like an application is. It's like, no, it doesn't matter what the user has. You're giving the app the person to do everything. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a company at one conference in Washington, D.C. about 2-3 years ago. And they were like, no, it doesn't work like that. I'm like, that's exactly how it works. And they're like, no, it doesn't work like that. You know, when you have a conversation with someone and they're so certain about it and you start to second guess yourself, like going, no, the sky is red. And then you're like, is my definition of blue wrong? Like that looks,
yes,
that's blue. Is the sky really red? Like, I don't remember.
Yes. So that's every conversation I have with my husband, quite frankly.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, moving on now.
I'm kidding. Not really, but a lot of them.
I mean, it's fair. This is all fair. It's disappointing that number one, like the permission types is interesting, but it is very important. It is disappointing though, that Microsoft 365 does not lead with an API story it's one of the things that's frustrating to me from a Microsoft 365 side, where I frequently have to ask myself, stand in the mirror, like going, does Microsoft really give a damn about Microsoft 365 development? Like, do they really care? There's no one person that everything kind of reports up to, that somebody kind of owns the story. And it's like, on the Azure side, there is. On the Microsoft 365 side, there's not. And so without somebody to really talk to kind of say, like, do you know the whole story with this and how things are allowed to go, and you don't have two teams building the same solution or in a different way for the same product, like, I don't know, Teams and the Teams toolkit and the Teams AI library. I don't know. It's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, it's super frustrating. And I mean, so back to the application permissions just for a second. This is one of the things, like, just to go back to our news a little bit and why I was so excited about the federated identity piece, is that I think there's, application permissions are so powerful, but they're necessary is the thing. They're necessary. You can't do any kind of, like, to go back to my other example of provisioning. Provisioning is a huge one. If you want to be able to go create the objects that users are going to then use, you need application permissions to be able to make that a reality. You have to. So you need to think about security first and foremost. And by using, you have to think about what's the security landscape that you have. If you're in the Azure ecosystem and you have managed identity available to you, that is the most secure way to secure application permissions over certificates, then client secrets, and whatever else might, come up after that, in my opinion, at least. And I think that's, backed up by others as well in the security space, which is not my area of expertise, but I think it's the most secure way to do things.
The Entra team, the Microsoft Identity team, the Entra team, they also strongly push, like, managed identities. It is a more secure way to do stuff because it adds an extra level of security. The other thing too that application permissions do that is it enables a scenario with real permissions that were not available previously, which is that, when you've ever created, like, a service account, like a real user account, to be able to access and do something. So if you do any kind of a scheduled or unattended process, for example, like CI and CD, it's not a user that's deploying the code. I want to be able to give an entity the ability to do that code. And so when you do any kind of, like, a server, like a daemon service or a scheduled service or whatever, application permissions are enabling you to work with these different endpoints that when there is no interactive user present. So what they enable you to do, delegated permissions, good practice, probably the bulletproof or the platinum standard is, for a user, you want to have MFA enabled. So multi-factor authentication enabled. Never forget, I was teaching a class one time and I was like, MFA, and somebody's like, what's MFA? And a guy raised his hand. He gave a completely different answer. And I'm like, I've never heard that. That's not what it is. And everybody's like, no, I think that is what it is. I'm like, oh no, time out. We're not losing the class. It's multi-factor authentication, period. So it's like I think he said, like, metadata federated something or authentication. I'm like, no, that's not correct.
Yeah.
Anyways, how do you know?
Well,
we're talking SharePoint. We're gonna move along. Google told me. Bing might have had a different answer. That's different. But the thing is, though, is that, like, this whole thing, it allows you to have an unattended process to be able to go about doing this, and I don't have to sit there and some of those things that were blocked before, like CI and CD in the SharePoint space. Before we could do certificates, if I was going to do a user, I had to have a service account with a user, and I had to implement a bad practice, which is all my users have to have MFA enabled, but I had to turn off MFA and authenticate as a service account using a username and password. That's not a good practice.
I have literally heard multiple times of companies asking, well, I'm going to create this user account and turn off MFA so that I can do this process, this, unattended process, because it's more secure than application permissions. Microsoft said so. I'm like, no, they didn't.
Maybe you talk to Microsoft Consulting Services, which I would put that in a different ballpark than talking to Microsoft. And there's other people at Microsoft that wouldn't.
Yeah. But still, I'm just like, no. And, like, you can't convince them otherwise. And it's super frustrating, but it's what it is. Anyway, the point of, like, so knowing the difference between application and delegated permissions is super important. But one of the other big frustrating parts is that when we have these endpoints, and graph is pretty much the most egregious in this exercise, is that you must have both delegated and application permissions for every single endpoint. The idea that you would, I'm saying you should, they don't. And there's so many, and I'll use an example that was like one of the ones that I vented and ranted about for months, and they finally fixed it, is the Planner API. So they're like, oh, Planner API, it only needs to be delegated permissions because you're only going to automate Planner things or create separate user interfaces for Planner for a user. So it just needs to be delegated permissions. Okay, so then how do we go and create or provision a plan? Or what if we have a business process that needs to update the task because you finished it over here and need to update it over here? Oh, hi, Copilot, I want to use AI to finish my task over here or read my tasks and then finish them. I don't want, that needs application permissions. Like that can't, you know what I mean? That's like the unattended, this process is going to go on over here and you're not getting an OBO flow for that, doing the OBO flow for that. So it's just, there's so many, this assumption that Microsoft makes about what business scenarios might need to be done and what then permissions you should need because the other ones they can't imagine is just, it makes me so mental. Do not assume what business processes are going to happen and why you might only need one or the other. Just friggin' give us both.
Yeah.
Give us both. It's just so frustrating.
You're spot on. Do you think there are justifications for some APIs to not support application permissions? For example,
maybe,
search.
But I can't think of one.
Search, everything is security trimmed. And so if you use application permissions, they're not security trimmed. Results.
Yeah, but I can come up with a bunch of scenarios where I'd want to use the power of search to get answers. And because application permissions would be fine, because I want to use search to go find things. Because if you think about how search configuration works, I can create search scopes. I can create, so if I'm creating content types, and I'll give you an example of this. So I have a solution for someone that we have a bunch of sites, hundreds of sites, and each site has a proposal library in the site. And so the proposals have a content type called proposal, and it has some managed metadata on it. And those managed metadata, or not managed metadata fields, but as in search managed properties, right? So managed properties. And so I've mapped all those managed properties. And now I have a process that I can run nightly that says, go look across my ecosystem and get me all the proposals where the status is active and the last sent date is not before such and such a time or 2 weeks ago, let's say. And once you get that list of all of those using search, because that's the easiest way to get that instead of going into each site collection one after another and pulling out those by list items, right? Now I've got all those items and I did it with search, and now I could just loop through them and go and execute, in this case, like a reminder email to the client. Hey, we sent you that proposal. Can you get back to us, next week on whether you'd like to move forward with that or not? There's an example of where search needed to be application permissions.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I didn't think about it like that.
But you're actually making my point for me, which is great. No, like you didn't think of it, all good, totally fine. But that's my point, right? Microsoft, stop thinking you know all the scenarios. You don't. You know what I mean? I don't know all the scenarios. So you were asking me, can you come up with one where you don't need it? I can't, because I can't imagine everything, and I don't want to pretend that I can imagine everything. There are people out there coming up with new, cool ideas every single day. I don't know it all. And so this idea that somebody else knows it all and goes, yes, you will never need application permissions, or you will never need delegated permissions for that. Ridiculous. Yeah. So other examples of this is there's the ability in SharePoint to follow a site. You can go and star a site. You cannot get the list of sites followed for another user. So if I want to, with application permissions, go and say, create like a web, like a solution where I'm pulling, I can't come up with maybe a good solution, but if I want to pull all the sites followed together and like augment that and say, hey, these are the top sites followed by our users, and like make a celebratory web part, or maybe these sites would be interesting to you. There are top 5 followed sites in our system. If I wanted to build that, I cannot, because I can't, as an application, go mine the data to find out who has followed what sites.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. That's fair. It's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating.
Yep. OneNote recently dropped app permissions. So where there's a OneNote API, they had application and delegated permission API. They just recently dropped the app permission permissions for the OneNote app. So now a company that we work with had to drop their support for provisioning OneNote, whatever you call those things. Can't do it anymore. Sorry. If you don't like this, talk to Microsoft. It's just mind blowing.
I mean, that kind of opens up the whole question of, but isn't OneNote just trash?
Okay, yes, I hear you, but at the same time, it's the point, right? It's the point of it. There's a lot of people out there who love OneNote. People give talks on OneNote. I get it. You love it. It's fine. I'm not gonna be like other people and tell you that your tool sucks. That's not what I'm saying. I use OneNote. I kind of like it okay. It's fine enough. It does the job. The bigger point here is that people have business process built around OneNote, and it's working for them. And so to take that tool away from them, I mean, maybe there was a good reason, and I actually kind of think there was probably a good reason why they dropped the app permissions, but then fix it. Like, fix it. Don't just remove it.
Yeah, but it took work to remove it. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's disappointing. You know what? I'm curious. I wonder how many, it's almost like I want to put up like a little pin doll. It's like going, where have Microsoft's permissions actually, where have they hurt you? And like put that to developers. Or I want to be like going, where's Microsoft's lack of an API and Microsoft 365? Where has that hurt you in your project? Can you point to the spot right here? Do we need to talk about that? Should we call, I don't want to use their names, but should we call Satya and say that this person they
hurt me.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's not nice. Anyway.
Yeah, I know we could take that metaphor a little too far.
Let's pull it right in.
Yep.
Anyway, that's what I had to say on this topic. I feel like we kind of beat it up. I don't know.
It's fair.
Do you have anything more you want to add?
No, it sucks. I think you covered it all. You covered it. You absolutely covered it. Good job. Good job.
All right.
With it.
Since I am the host of this show, I'm going to let you go first for your pick, and then I'll go first when it's your hosting.
Okay. That sounds good to me. My pick, this is kind of fun. I got to go with my, I got to go to my roots. It won't be there by the time this episode comes live, but a private lunar lander from Japan has entered the orbit around the moon and is planned for a touchdown on the lunar surface in June. Again,
cool.
Yeah, this is really cool here. So the countdown to the lunar landing has begun. SpaceX launched this for this company. Launched it in January. Oh, sorry. Nope. My apologies. SpaceX did that for another company, a US-based company called Firefly back in January, and it got there in March, but it crashed and then it fell over. And another company tried to do it a few days later, but they ended up sideways in a crater. I've been there. I've been in college. I know what those nights are like. So I get there. So this one, though, the Japanese one, though, is it is there, and it has entered the lunar orbit, and in June it's going to attempt a touchdown. So it's circling the moon right now.
That's so cool.
It is cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
We'll see if they do it. How about you? What you got for us? I'm getting hungry.
All right. Yeah, I don't have a recipe today. I have a show. So on Netflix, love this series. There's a series on Netflix called Chef's Table. It is so so well done. The filming, everything is so good about it. So this is a new series called Chef's Table Legends. It features Jamie Oliver, Jose Andres, Thomas Keller, and Alice Waters, who are legendary chefs, in this, that are still alive, essentially.
Well, they couldn't get the people who've died.
Paul Bocuse, there's legendary chefs, but they're not, with us anymore. But these are today's legendary, some of today's legendary chefs. But what they were really focusing on with the legends piece of this that was a little different, and that's why they picked these 4 people, is they're not just chefs who are great cooks. They are chefs who are literally changing the landscape of the human condition with their cooking. And so for Jamie Oliver, that was essentially he sort of got upset at the food that was being served to school children in Britain. And he took it on as his mission that he was going to see the quality of food, given to kids in schools elevated to nutritious, good food instead of processed crap. And he really took that on, and he not only succeeded in the UK, but then he started bringing it to the US as well. And he did do some good in the US as well. So Jamie Oliver for that. Jose Andres, anybody who doesn't know about his World Central Kitchen is, probably living under a rock. That is one of the most amazing organizations out there right now. If you don't know about it, essentially, he has taken it on to any place that there's any natural disaster, war-torn region, whatever. His organization is orchestrating bringing food there and then organizing the chefs who live there, as well as bringing in chef coordinator to cook meals live, for those people in those areas. He's absolutely everywhere. If there's a disaster happening, if there's a war happening, if there's anything happening, he and his organization are there helping. Just amazing. Thomas Keller is sort of the father of the America having a cuisine. And he has sort of, now that he's an elder statesman, if you will, he has taken it on as his mission to bring up the next generation. And so he's doing a lot of training and sort of giving opportunity to all the sort of next generation chefs. So that's really cool. And then Alice Waters is really the mother of the organic food movement. There was no real organic food movement until she started her Chez Panisse restaurant. And then she was sort of upset at the quality of food that she could find, having lived in overseas in Europe and knowing the beautiful food that they could just get themselves. She was in California, and you would think, oh, well, California, they got all the food everywhere, right? Not at that time, not when she started Chez Panisse. And so she started going out and finding farmers who would grow food organically and let her buy it. And she's the reason that we can get organic food now is because she sort of started that. So all of these documentaries on all these chefs are more around their impact on the world and not so much them as chefs, where some of the other Chef's Table series that are out there are more about the chef and what they bring and their personal history, which I love and I find it fascinating. This one was especially moving because of just, knowing, I knew all of these things fundamentally, but getting the full story was just super fun and super interesting. So that is my pick.
That's really good. I had not, this is what I remember. We were having dinner and you sort of bring this up. You were stumbled over what it was called. I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I did. I was stumbling over it. Yeah. I couldn't remember the name of the legends part of it. Yeah. This
is a good pick. I've been looking for something like this. So this is, if I look like I was distracted, unfortunately I went down the Netflix,
rabbit hole.
I fell down Netflix.
You opened the link and then you were out of it. Yeah.
I did. Getcha. Well, I was looking up all the different episodes and I'm almost like, this is interesting. So I did not know about the Spanish guy, Jose
Andres.
Yeah, I did not. I'd never heard that name before.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that was a first. That was a first for me. So, but it's good.
Well, then you were living under a rock.
You said that, and I was like, oh, I'm living under a rock. So yeah, that hurt. That hurt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I won't say that again, just in case you are rocking it.
It's okay.
So
Awesome.
I think we've rocked this episode.
We have done this. We've rocked this episode. And oh, look at that. We're at the hour mark. So
yes,
sorry,
let's rock it on out.
All right. Good to talk
Thanks,
to you,
everybody.
Julie.
Did you like this episode? Please like and share it with your friends. We are on YouTube, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. All the links are in the video description. If you have a question, head to codedeploygo.live where you can send it in. Also, sign up for our mailing list on our site at codedeploygo.live to learn about future episodes, opportunities for listeners, and get the show notes from each episode sent straight to your inbox. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks.